Okay, hello everybody. This is the Alt Monarchist, and I've invited a guest, Darth Kilhoon, to join me. He's a fellow monarchist, and we're both going to discuss the Ukrainian situation and the geopolitics related to Ukraine. Hello, Darth
Yeah.
Kilhoon.
Hey, how's it going, old monarchist?
It's going good. All right. So you made a video about Ukraine. Was it 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks ago now.
Yeah. You told the Protestants to stop their crocodile tears for Ukraine.
It's
Yeah,
a part of a bigger project I intend to do to just call out the call out the Protestants. Jesus, I almost said monarchists.
yeah,
To call out the Protestants for their just they have a very short attention span when it comes to history, and they tend to forget or just be oblivious of historical precedent. So just kind of pointing out their either hypocrisy or just blind ignorance is what's needed to discern their false information when it comes to especially American media that's dominated by both the left and, if you're talking about certain conservative outlets, the Protestant world order.
yeah. And like I think like most Americans don't even know what's going on there, right? Like they've been ignoring the whole Donbass situation. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like, only just a couple months ago, they start hearing about Russian troops massing at the Ukrainian border, and like now, oh, we stand with Ukraine. How dare Putin try to take them over? Then he starts taking them over, and then like immediately, oh, like it. And hey guys, you do know what Ukraine was doing for the last 8 years, right? Ukraine was bombing their own people, like their own citizens, um, and they're persecuting other Orthodox churches. They're persecuting the churches of the Moscow Patriarchate, which again, actually, people don't realize this, but the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is not actually a puppet of Kirill in Moscow, the patriarch over there. People don't realize that like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate has their own leader, which is Metropolitan Onufry. And but people don't realize this. People think he's some kind of puppet, and so they think it's okay for the Ukrainian government to kind of persecute them unofficially. Though they do this unofficially because the Ukrainian government itself does not directly persecute the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, but their followers do this for them, right? They'll walk into a parish controlled by the UOC, and they kick them out, and they force them out of there, and they just take over that parish, and they hand it over to what we call the schismatic Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the Kiev Patriarchate, and so for us Orthodox, and I know Darth Calhoun's a Roman Catholic, but for us Orthodox, the Kiev Patriarchate is basically a schismatic group, and we as Orthodox recognize only the UOC of MP, and we don't recognize the Ukrainian Kiev Patriarchate because the way they were founded, the way they were started, it was not according to the rules of Orthodoxy, and so we don't recognize them. And what's interesting is that like Protestants or Americans, they don't know all these tiny details. They don't know how it's not just the Putin going to war trying to conquer Ukraine. It has a lot more to do than just politics. There's also a religious aspect. And for the last 8 years, the Ukrainian schismatics, they have been persecuting the official legitimate Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the government of Ukraine did nothing. And the priests and the leaders of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they could not do anything. They cannot write a petition. They cannot complain about this. They cannot ask the government to protect them because the government did not want to protect them. They did nothing. This was pure religious persecution over there. And this was ignored for the last 8 years. And I've already mentioned earlier that Ukraine has been bombing and murdering their own citizens, 14,000 of them for the last 8 years. Some say 16,000, but others say 14,000, like it's the more accurate number. But
it's still an ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, it's still an ethnic cleansing. And and for the last 8 years, all this was ignored. All this was ignored by not just Protestants, just in America, right? And what's interesting is that only now people start to pay attention to what's going on over there, and immediately all eyes are focused on Ukraine, but nobody paid attention to the Donbass region. Eyes were not focused on that region. Like, it was totally ignored. Most Americans did not know what was going on over there. They're totally confused about the whole situation. And then Russia comes in, does not really destroy much infrastructure, or it's not they don't destroy much civilian infrastructure. They start going after military bases and military depots, and all of a sudden, oh, how could these bloody Russians take over Ukraine? Have you guys not been paying attention to what Ukraine was doing? They're committing a genocide, an ethnic cleansing, religious persecution for the last 8 years. No one paid attention to that. And I lived in the Donbass for 1 year. And I remember when I came back home to tell people about my trip to Ukraine, and people at home, they were, some of the folks who were kind of following what's going on over there, they wanted me to tell them what happened. And so I told them, hey guys, well, there's a rebel force, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, and they're all rebels, and they're trying to secede from Ukraine, and Ukraine's murdering all the innocent people and killing them. And immediately people were triggered. The same people who asked me to tell them what happened, what I saw, I told them what I saw, what happened. And that angered them because they wanted to hear the opposite. They wanted to hear about the evil rebels. They wanted to hear about the evil Donbass rebels, because the media told them that they're bad, that they're all Putin puppets, right? But I was there for a year. I was all over the place, just going around, with my little handheld camera, just filming what I could film, and I just lived amongst those people, and I lived through like a lot of the damage that Ukraine has been doing over there, and people just did not take it seriously. Like they took it seriously, but they were not happy with what I was saying. They were very angered, and they tell me, well, you do not really know what you're talking about. Because I'm like, why? Oh, because I'm going against your narrative. Is that why? Because people expect me to confirm their narrative, to confirm their bias. That's what they're excited to hear what I was going to say. But once I started talking, it just, like, they just went, you know what, like, whatever, you're not interesting, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about. But I'm thinking, so you're listening to these news sources, MSNBC, Fox News. They were not even there. Like the last CNN reporter that went there was like in the early summer of 2014, and that's it. He was gone. He never came back. And then, I showed up a little bit later, like a couple months later, and I lived there for like almost a year. And for some reason, I was there on the ground. I saw everything. I guess I'm not credible, right? But CNN, Fox News, who are not over there, who are not in the Donbass region for the last 8 years, all of a sudden they're credible about what's going on right now in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just point that down. I'm sure you've seen the memes, the NPC where they get their COVID chip taken out and they get the Ukraine chip put in for their outrage. It's just the classic trope of the plebeians, and the average person does not have the critical thinking skills to truly understand situations fully that aren't fed to them in narratives. Like they'll only listen to what is fed to them from academia, media, their scumbag politicians and bureaucrats up in Washington that are taking checks from the World Economic Forum that want to keep ethnic Russians repressed because they still have this Cold War boomer mentality and fail to understand that Russia is not evil Soviet Union like we were fed our entire lives. So I'm not surprised that there'd be outrage to you going against their narrative, but it is appreciative for those of us that can actually see through this fog and see the lies of the media and how they just fail to report anything true. Like, say, the yellow vest in France, they stopped covering it after a week, and it really went on for, I think, 3 years, and nobody in the world knows about it. Same with nobody knows about the Donbass. Like, say, I have to explain to people that like support Ukraine fervently. I'm like, so you support the regime that took over in a State Department backed coup that signed laws into motion that banned the Russian language, banned any association with Russian people, effectively making the Russian population in Ukraine expats and non-citizens, and you don't expect the Russians to rebel?
Yeah.
That's the questions I pose them, and then they either go blank or they go into outrage mode.
Yeah, because you're forcing them to think, and they don't like that.
It's I used to watch this YouTuber called Geopoltical before his channel was taken down. He had like, I think 300,000 subscribers, but he talked about this, like why there's such outrage, and it's because thinking is a high energy intensive skill. So if your body does these things to minimize expensive energy as much as possible, and that's why critical thinking is so limited amongst most people. It's because it's their body actively preventing them from actually expanding upon their thinking skills. So some of it I do say is genetic, and that's why 90% of people don't have critical thinking skills, according to statistics, and why mobs are so easily swayed. That's what I chalk it down to.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that partially one of the reasons why Donbass even started the rebellion is because of the State Department sponsored coup that happened in Ukraine. And you mentioned that how they forbade the Russian language. That's partially one of the reasons why Donbass rebelled, is because that area, like they're fine speaking Russian. And so what's interesting is that they were the original conspirators, the ones who overthrew the legitimate governments. They originally were about to start forbidding the Russian language everywhere. But then once these rebels, before the Civil War even started to heat up really bad, they realized what it's leading to. So they immediately said, oh no, we changed our minds. No, we're not really interested in banning the Russian language. We just don't want it to be official on a government language, on a government scale, right? And so they, of course, were lying about it. They said, oh, we never wanted to ban anything. That's not true. They did. They changed their minds. They took a step back. They realized maybe we could calm those people down if we go back a bit. But then it was too late by then. Donbass started rebelling. And plus, Donbass started rebelling because they saw what happened in Crimea. They were thinking, well, because Crimea, here's the thing, if Russian troops did not enter Crimea, they would have had the same situation in Donbass. They would have had a bloody civil war conflict, and it would have been just a big mess. So Russia going into Crimea basically prevented a civil war right there in the Crimean Peninsula. So the Donbass people, they saw what's going on in Crimea. They assumed that if they start to do the same thing, that Russia would just send in some troops and take them over. But Russia came in 8 years too late, unfortunately. And so but the point is that the government officials, they lied when they said, oh, guys, come on, we changed our minds. Or they'll say, oh, we never intended to ban the Russian language. You can speak it all you want. No, that's a lie. They originally wanted to, but then they realized that people were rebelling over there. So they said, oh, we're not changing anything, but it was too late. You already started the Civil War. Zelensky comes to power. And Zelensky, here's the thing, a lot of the Ukrainian citizens who also speak Russian, and not necessarily ethnically Russian, just ethnic Ukrainians who have no problem speaking both languages. And many Ukrainian citizens assumed, hey, like if we choose Zelensky, he will unite everybody because he promised that he will that he'll have a compromise with the Donbass. He promised peace. He promised that every single citizen of Ukraine, everybody, will be united, and we'll all have like one unified country. And so that's one of the reasons why he was elected, chosen by the people, because he promised to unite everybody. And so what happened is that when he got into power, when he was elected, he was worse than his predecessor. He was more aggressive towards the Donbass because he lied. He claimed he'll come up with a compromise for Donbass. And on top of that, when he became president, when Zelensky, the so-called mediator, the so-called peacemaker, when he became president, that's when he officially started to ban the Russian language in public. You know, in public stores, like if you walk to a small tiny little grocery store, and you start speaking Russian. Oh, you're not supposed to speak Russian inside here. No, no, no. That's Zelensky, the so-called peacemaker, the one who's supposed to unify the country. He made things a lot worse than his predecessor Poroshenko. And so Zelensky, you could say that his rating immediately dropped because people thought, wait a minute, you're supposed to bring peace. On top of that, when Zelensky and Putin met, Putin offered Zelensky this. He said, hey, since you're now the new president, make a deal with the Donbass, make a compromise with them, give them the autonomy that they want, right? So kind of don't support their secession or independence, don't support them joining Russia, just come with a compromise with them, give them full autonomy, right? And so they'll still be within Ukrainian borders, but they'll just be given autonomy. And
it's like the Danzig situation in 1939.
Well, but Zelensky, he did not listen to that suggestion. Instead, he went down to the front lines, right? And he met with the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi battalion. He met with them, and they straight up told him, you know what, Mr. President, if you try to make any compromise with these people, with the Donbass rebels, they said, if you try to kind of end this war peacefully, right, we will get Western Ukraine on our side, and they will rise up against you, because Western Ukraine is the heart of Azov. That's where they're from. They're not locals from Azov, by the way.
The historically part of Poland.
But the Azov guys, they're all from Western Ukraine. They have nothing to do with the Azov Sea, right? They call themselves Azov. I don't know why they call themselves that, but most of them, they're not from the Azov area anyway. They're from Western Ukraine. But anyways, like they straight up told them, we'll get Western Ukraine on our side, and we'll start, our own uprisings against you. We'll try to overthrow you. Zelensky immediately in that video, he's talking with them on the front lines. You can see like he's not acting like a strong, tough president. He's just kind of caving in, saying, "Hey, you know what, guys? Come on, we gotta talk this all out." And he just walks away like a I don't know, like a beat up puppy or something. And so he did not bring peace to the Donbass. He just escalated it even more to appease certain people whom he was afraid of. And then again, I mentioned earlier, he banned the Russian language. He turned out to be worse and more dictatorial than Poroshenko. People thought Poroshenko was bad. That's why Zelensky was elected. People thought Poroshenko was this bad president, and he's sowing discord everywhere. No, turns out Zelensky just amped it up even more. He went full speed with this whole division of the country. And so that's why the people of the Donbass hate Zelensky even more, because there are more aggressive bombings because of him. Like the bombings became even more aggressive under Zelensky. And on top of that, he also banned TV stations where they had dissident opinions, where they have different points of view. Now, people talk about Russia attacking dissenters, all that stuff. But here's the thing: Russia still has Rain TV. Russia still has Echo of Moscow. Russia still has a bunch of other like opposition TV channels, TV stations, radio stations, and like they're constantly talking crap about Putin. And for some reason, they're still open. Like they're not shut down. They're still open for business. Well, in Ukraine, prior to this invasion, prior to the invasion, like there were TV stations that were not necessarily even so dissident. They're just more kind of neutral. They're saying, hey, we should kind of find a compromise with Russia. We should not hate Russia. Plus, many of our citizens are Russians. We should kind of be friendly. Those TV stations were shut down immediately by Zelensky. And
Mhm.
it's like, wait a minute, like you're doing the things that Putin is accused of doing.
Yeah, you're trying to be the peacemaker, you're trying to be this arbiter, but you shut down your opposition that go against the narrative. It sounds familiar to a Western style regime. Just a bit more open about it. Just a comment on Zelensky, but I I kind of think that Zelensky was more on purpose. Because one, he was an actor before that. He
Oh
has
yeah.
he's a rich man. He has millions in Swiss bank accounts. He was supported by NGOs. I think his campaign was partially funded by Open Borders Society by George Soros.
Well, I think George Soros made all these tweets about Ukraine, saying how we should support Ukraine. Yeah,
because
he's a Soros puppet.
it's well, I consider it part of the I'm using some of academic agents language. I don't know if you watch his channel, but he refers to this hegemony, this liberal hegemony that wishes to dominate, control everything, the GAE, or the global American empire. Because it's just the United States trying to spread our very degenerate policies to other countries to try to affirm our own essentially affirm our own sin, essentially. To bring this back to Ukraine,
Yeah.
we could see this with the Euromaidan, where it
Well,
was like, the Western media portrayed as these brave people, these
mhm.
masses. They rose up against
Yeah.
their corrupt oligarchic authority.
Well,
Not,
Euromaidan was the perfect opportunity for criminals to take over, which happened, by the way. The current president, I'm sorry, not the president, sorry. The president, I'm losing my mind right now. The mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, he was a famous boxer. Then he became mayor of Kiev, right?
mhm.
And so he only became mayor of Kiev because of his popularity during the Maidan thing. And so what's interesting is that prior to the whole Maidan coup, there was a prosecutor investigating his father,
Mhm.
right? His father for criminal activity. And so this prosecutor was noticing some criminal activity with Klitschko's family, that there's corruption and, basically Klitschko might have to go to jail. That prosecutor would eventually become Natalia Poklonskaya. I don't know if you know her.
Was she the Crimean
Yeah.
chief
She she
prosecutor?
she became the chief prosecutor of Crimea after the whole Maidan thing. But originally, she was in Kiev. She worked in Kiev. She worked in the prosecutorial departments in Kiev, and she was investigating the Klitschko family. And then all of a sudden, and on top of that, she actually prior before I go ahead, I need to kind of go back a bit. Prior to the whole Maidan thing, she jailed some other major criminal elements, right? And so after she jailed those criminal elements, she started to investigate the Klitschko family. Then Maidan happens, right? Maidan happens. There's
Mhm.
chaos in Kiev, and when the president gets illegally impeached. By the way, the people at the Maidan thing, they did not overthrow the president, because the Berkut SWAT teams, they're holding on pretty strong. They're not letting those people in the parliament building. They're not letting them into the Supreme Rada, the Supreme Council, the parliament. They're not letting the people in there, right? Like they're holding it off. But parliament themselves, they decide, hey, the president's not here, let's just impeach him illegally, right? And so he gets impeached. So going back to the criminal case, so what's going on here? Natalia Poklonskaya, all those major people that she jailed, these big criminal elements, she sees them like being released from prison, like by this mob, right? They're released from prison, and then some of the guys who she jailed, they walk into her office, like, aha, you see, now we're in power, charge now, huh? And these people, they have nothing to do with politics. They're not politicians, but all of a sudden they are now connected to the new political regime that's in power now, right? And so, of course, Natalia Poklonskaya, she leaves Kiev, and she goes on vacation in Crimea, and then she gets stuck in Crimea, and she becomes the chief prosecutor. That's a whole different story right there. But still, already, like that one incident right there, that one incident with Natalia Poklonskaya investigating these criminals, including Klitschko's family, like already just shows that like you have criminal elements within the Ukrainian government in power right now, right? And
I mean,
yeah.
I was gonna tie this, like that's exactly have you ever heard of the term bio-Leninism?
Never heard of that term, no.
So bio-Leninism is it's essentially the central thesis, the central thesis that binds any astroturfed regime to its power. Bio-Leninism is essentially based upon Lenin's strategy, where he took all the dregs, the degenerates, all the people that are typically ostracized by normal society, like say in Tsarist Russia was the ostracization of homosexuals, Jews, gypsies, and these other degenerate minorities that were not part of the natural Russian community. And he took them and used them as his central power base. He gave them authority. He put them in high positions of power. Like say Trotsky was put in charge of the Red Army, and he was a Jew. He was part of this religious minority that was typically persecuted or left suppressed in Russia, and now he gave him a ton of power. He did this in all positions, like he put Ukrainians in charge of high government offices. He made Jews he made Jews political commissars. I think they made up about a third of all political commissars during his regime. So on and so forth.
Yeah, like so all that happened, like I know all that happened, I just never knew there was a term for it. So it's called bio-Leninism.
Yep, bio-Leninism.
Bio-Leninism, okay. Yeah, because all that happens. Yeah, like everything you said, that all happens. Of course, there's not everything was black and white. You also have like normal people fighting for the Red Army, but again, like they're all duped. Like the normal folks are just duped into thinking they're fighting for the rights of peasants, right? But then you had
the ethnic Russians.
But then you had the other side of the Reds, which was like those degenerates, the folks who were ostracized society. Yes, like you had that elements right there, and and so basically, what you said right now is what happened in Ukraine during the 2014 Maidan coup. That's basically what happened. You had like the worst dregs of society go out there and protest, and many of them did it for money. By the way, there are many people who would write to their relatives saying, "Hey, so they're going to pay us some good money if I go out and like protest over there in Kiev," and it's normal. Also, paying protesters was always normal practice before 2014, by the way. Before that 2014 Maidan coup, paying protesters was always normal practice, right? Just to hire somebody to protest. And here in America, when Trump was being elected, we had on Craigslist, if you remember, there were Craigslist ads where they would hire people to protest Trump. I believe they paid
Yep.
$15 an hour. And even here in Arizona, like they would bus in these paid protesters. Like I remember that we had the same thing here. Like because
Yep.
that's another reason why I'm really sickened by boomers who support Ukraine right now, because I'm thinking the same strategy was used here and there, and like boomers don't see this. And yeah, and so going back to Ukraine, Ukraine's criminal elements took over, and that's why earlier in the very beginning of our conversation, I mentioned the fact that like a lot of the neo-Nazis fighting the neo-Nazi battalions, they're not even like true to their own ideology. There's a bunch of criminals who decided to use that ideology as an excuse to do whatever they want to do.
Yep. And it's just the neo-Nazis were not accepted in the last regime. So of course the neo-Nazis side with the new regime. It's the Bioleninism at work. It's these social dregs. It's these criminals. It's these ostracized peoples. Like a typical strategy in any revolution is you raid the prison and you release all the prisoners to be your foot
Yep.
soldiers. Like the storming of, like, I hate Bastille Day in France
Oh yeah.
because the Bastille was this prison in the middle of France, in the
Yep.
middle of Paris, that held the worst of the worst people. All the all like essentially the people that could influence others to commit crime. Like you had famous well, infamous writers, I'll actually say, writers that advocated for degeneracy, um uh, for degeneracy, for rebellion. You had murderers, you had rapists, you had all these people put in the Bastille, the most secure prison in Paris. And the first place the revolutionaries go is the Bastille to release all these social dregs and make them their foot soldiers, because all these dregs would just be locked up again if it wasn't for these revolutionaries. So now they're so dependent upon this revolution for their own freedom, for their own ability to act freely, that they are the most loyal component in that regime. And that's why like they pointed all these like dissident junior enlisted and all these just dregs into the officer corps. Like Napoleon was just a minor Italian noble. He was a cadet at the beginning of the French Revolution. And then he
I thought he was a Corsican.
Well, yeah, he's ethnically Italian, Corsican.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. He's this Italian. He's not even French. He's not part of the lingua franca. He's a persona non grata, but he's this outsider, and that's why they made him a general, because he can order a column of troops to fire upon French natives that are anti-revolutionary, because he is an Italian and he doesn't sympathize with these people. And that's why like political commissars in Bolshevik Russia were typically Jewish or at least non-Russian.
But anyways, but back to Ukraine though. So we already know that Ukraine's very full of criminal elements. The media will not cover this though, unfortunately. And the Protestant boomer here in America will ignore all of this.
Yep.
Like you and I already explained how like, these are crazy radical people who are murdering their own citizens, right?
And
it just goes over their head. Just oops.
Yep.
Yeah, but Russia still cannot invade Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's of course the Ukrainian government using these minorities as their foot soldiers too.
Well,
because
they're more like political minorities within the country.
Political minorities, social dregs, just the non. I'm gonna say, I don't mean like Orthodox like religion, but like non-Orthodox, not the typical Ukrainian. The non-standard Ukrainian, they're used as foot soldiers against the ethnic Russians, because it's easy for them to execute, to rape, to pillage these enemies to the regime, that to the average Ukrainian would be seen as a brother, but to these social dregs, they are just an enemy in their way. And
Well, yeah, because even just a regular Ukrainian who like who is who still supports the governments, like they don't necessarily hate like the Donbass people themselves, right? They just think maybe they're brainwashed, that's why they started their rebellion in Donbass, right? But they don't necessarily have this visceral hatred. But these dregs society, they do, right? It's because like they even say like they don't care if they kill kids or kill women. Like they have no more. They have like no morality behind them, right? And so that's why the government really actually relies on them. They rely on them to do all these dirty deeds, and because like a regular Ukrainian soldier, like will sometimes actually try to figure out why are these people rebels? Why are the Donbas soldiers rebels? And there are many Skype videos where regular Ukrainian soldiers, not these Azov battalion guys, not these IDAR battalion people, but just regular Ukrainian soldiers will sometimes try to contact the rebels through Skype, and they try to conversate with them, say, but why are you doing this? I just want to figure out, maybe we should all just be friends, like, and
Mhm.
of course the Ukrainian government would never shows those conversations. It's usually somehow for some reason on the pro-Russian side, right? And by the way, which also kind of makes you want to question how come like we're not allowed to have dissident information about Ukraine, but that's a different that we'll talk about that later.
That's it.
But yeah, but basically, yeah, you're right though. Like the Ukrainian government cannot even fully rely on regular Ukrainians or just a normal Ukrainian soldier. They have to rely on the worst of the worst of the Ukrainian military in order to uphold their own regime. Which I would like to figure out is why can't the Protestant see that? Well, because the typical American Protestant did not do his own research. He does not see this. You and I, we as monarchists and as followers of the apostolic succession,
Apostolics.
yeah, like yeah, we basically we dug deeper, and and plus I've actually been to the place, right? And I visited the place during the turmoil 8 years ago, and basically like that's you and I, we have all this information. We dug deep, like, and maybe because we're also maybe autistic, maybe that's why we're so well researched as well. But uh, like it's only these dregs of society that are keeping the regime in power. Like normal Ukrainians don't
Mhm.
really like the regime, or if they do like the regime, like they're patriotic about it. Like they're not really, going to like really hate the people of the Donbass. It's
They're not throwing up Roman salutes and
yeah,
hailing the Ukrainian state. Yeah, it's which I kind of can see like now that the invasion is I mean, I hate Western media how it says, "Ah, Russia is losing this war because we didn't, because Russia didn't pull in America and just take over the country in 2 days." I mean, of course, whenever the media they admit that we firebombed Iraq for like a month before we sent any Abrams across that border, but let's just ignore that. You see, like the Azov battalion in particular, they're claiming that they are going to fight to the death in Madrianopol, and I have a theory that they're doing that because they know that no matter how far that they retreat, eventually they will lose the war, and they know that they are persona non grata to the Russians, and then if when the Russian authority takes over, they will be hunted down either way, so they might as well stand their ground for the regime here and possibly have a chance of winning instead of retreating and losing in the long term. I mean that's a theory, but
I mean it's possible
I
because when you think about it, where is the like when you think about it, where is the Ukrainian army, right? Like because
they're surrendering
yeah,
constantly.
yeah. Well, don't say that. That's not correct. It's not politically correct to say that. But where is their
Nope.
army? Like, where is their army? Like, when you think about this, Russia is actually tiptoeing. Like, I forgot his name, Coach Redpill or Red Coach something. I think Coach Redpill. Yeah, he mentioned this. He goes, Russia's just tiptoeing in there, right? And if you look at a lot of these videos, like if they spot Russian soldiers going through cities, the cities are fine. They're not demolished. They're basically preserved, right? And
Mhm.
like, and what's interesting is that the only time you see demolished or something destroyed is somehow in a photo where there's Ukrainian soldiers present. Think about that.
Yep.
Like whenever there's something
It's
demolished or destroyed, it's always with Ukrainian soldiers standing there, right? While but when you see like a video of Russians actually going through some town, the town's basically fine, unharmed. Like if you just compare the two militaries, the Russian military has been actually very professionally trained, while the Ukrainian military, like the only thing they've been doing for the last 8 years, like they had their major battles in 2014, 2015, and they were losing to a bunch of ragtag rebels, literally, right? And then for the
yep.
most part, from 2016 up until now, they're just doing nothing but bombings, throwing, shooting bombs. They're not really doing actual true military activity, right? And so, yeah, but
It's
they show us this video of a Russian military column going in panic mode because of one artillery shell hit them, and they don't know what to do, right? But what's interesting,
they're
the
not
camera,
used to the enemy firing back.
but what's interesting, the camera is not zooming in, right? The camera is like not, there's a camera. It's like you would think, because the camera does do some zooms, then kind of stops, right? But does not zoom in further when, like, because all Russian military convoys in Ukraine have Z's, V's, X's, and O's. O's are from Belarus, but you have the Z's, V's, and X's, right? X's are from Chechnya, right? And so you have
Mhm.
all these markings on the military equipment to distinguish who's who, right? In that video, you don't see any of the markings. The camera does not zoom in further in just to see who it is, right? But we're being presented, like it's being presented to us as if it's the Russian military, when it's kind of clear that's the Ukrainian military. That's what the camera is not zooming in, because they don't want to, embarrass themselves, or they don't want to embarrass their own military.
I mean, it's also for we're talking about Azov, but like Azov, like just to explain to the audience, like they're not part of the Ukrainian military, but they are part of the Ukrainian National Guard, which the Ukrainian National Guard is not, it's not like the American National Guard for those American audiences. They are a gendarmerie force. They are national police, but they are most of the time actually better equipped and better trained than the Ukrainian army, because the Kiev regime uses the National Guard as their shock troops, as their soldiers they can rely upon. They're politically disciplined ones. And that's why they introduced Azov into the National Guard and put them under their payroll, because they knew that they were politically expedient. They were able to be used and for the regime's purposes. But the Ukrainian army, on the other hand, has been suffering from funding shortages and lack of training and um, uh, low munitions, etc., because they just haven't, they're not politically trustworthy by the Ukrainian regime, which is why, like, of course, the Western media is omitting this, but most of the only fierce resistance coming out of this war is coming from the National Guard, because they know that they are the political shock troops and they are going to be the ones on the chopping block because they're not traditional soldiers. They technically don't even fall under the Geneva Convention in that case. Um, well, then the Ukrainian army, they have been they have been treated like shit for years. They have not been properly trained, equipped, even fed and clothed. So the fact that they're seeing another professional army coming on the case, one that's well trained, one that does military maneuvers with other countries like Russia, and they're not fighting a brush war. Like, this is also the syndrome with the American militaries. We're only used to fighting brush wars, and that's how the Ukrainian army has been doing this too. Is they're fighting these low intensity wars against insurgency styles, and even then they're getting their asses kicked
Well, honestly,
by what you said.
Ukraine's like first actual major war was the civil war at Donbass. Like, I mean, like, when Ukraine gained independence in 1991, right? Like the first actual like major war where they actually had to like physically fight on the ground with tanks was basically in the Donbass.
Yeah, they are losing to these two tiny little provinces, ones that don't have professional armies that have militias. Admittedly, they probably do have some training by Russia. I would kind of give the Western media that, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
give them Russia the credit as the Western media does about arming them and giving them artillery and
Well,
all this
here's the
stuff.
thing. Here's the thing. In the early stages of the Donetsk uprising, there were Ukrainian military units who joined the rebels, which is information that's always
Mhm.
been ignored. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they had this professional force, but even then, the bulk of their forces are made up of these militiamen, and they're kicking the asses of professionally trained soldiers. It's real embarrassing, guys, just to say. And now you're up against a professional army. I'm not surprised Ukraine is losing this war, just to say the least.
Yeah. And
Um,
well, like Ukraine is not just losing this war, but we're our media, our social media is telling us well, given this perception that they're actually winning the war somehow,
mhm.
which kind of makes no
Just
sense. You just look at the maps, right? Look at like all these new maps are coming out every couple of days, just showing the progress of the Russian invasion, right? And it's like, yeah, Ukraine's winning so much, the Russians are taking more territory, right? And
yeah.
I believe it was the Financial Times, if I'm not mistaken, where they claimed that Russia apparently asked China for aid, which I kind of doubt they did. But even if they did, okay. But here's the thing, though: like it makes no sense why Russia would call for aid, for Chinese aid, when Russia is literally here. Here's what they're using: one, they used like less than 1/10 of their military might in Ukraine. Two, they have Belarus as an ally already there with their own troops to back them up, right? And then three, they have their own Chechen troops that they use, by the way, throughout Russian history during the Tsarist times. Chechens, that the Wild Division they call them, that is, they always had Chechen units fighting for the Tsar, and then now you have independent Russia. They have their own Chechen units again fighting for Russia, right? So you have these Chechen units, and four, Russia is also relying on the Donetsk, Lugansk military, which again has been training themselves for 8 years of fighting against the Ukrainian army, right? You have the Donetsk, Lugansk militias who have the experience of fighting against the Ukrainian army for 8 years, right? And so Russians also are using them as backup as well. So it makes no sense for Financial Times to make a claim that Russia's asking calling China for aid when like and I've heard from other sources that Russia's using their last reserves. Russia barely used any of their official forces in Ukraine. So and then they're relying on Belarus, they're relying on the Chechen forces, and they're relying on the Donetsk, Lugansk militias combined, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like they're barely so Russia like is like when it comes to their official military, they're barely using any of their official military might, right? And that's why you could say, well, they're tiptoeing their way into Ukraine. They're going in there really slow because one, they're not interested in doing what our military would do, carpet bomb the whole place and like till there's nothing left, and then just walk in with tanks and soldiers and say, yeah, look how victorious we are. Everything's destroyed. Because if Russia really wanted to just destroy Ukraine, they would have done it in a week. They they would have
Mm-hmm.
knocked out everything in a week. They would have demolished all the cities. They would have completely demoralized the population. But if you just look at the videos of the battles, if you just look at the maps, right? Russia's using like a small amount of force, and um, the Ukrainian army is nowhere to be found. The Ukrainian army is just surrendering or being demolished. And
Yep. And
like you mentioned, the National Guard are the only ones who are legitimately trying to do something.
yeah, just there. It's the politically expedient, the ones that will be executed at war's end that will actually stand and fight. And it's kind of the you don't trap a predator in a corner because that's when he becomes most vicious. And That's why you see all these cauldrons and corridors being formed by the Russian army. They're letting the civilians out. They're letting them out in controlled columns, controlled corridors, and in that also you see Ukrainian military personnel also fleeing or surrendering in masses or just dropping their arms and walking out with the civilians, which there's a lot of that that's not being reported either. Um, just the Ukrainian army is not putting up this fight because it's just not, well, one, its heart is not in the fight. It's kind of like our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, where our hearts were not really in the war. So of course, all of our big top planners couldn't rely on us to invade Iraq or Afghanistan without completely carpet bombing the place to have zero resistance against us. And that's why we do all these things, because why are we in this war? And that's why I use the term that the American army is second to the Air Force. The Air Force will do the majority of the fighting,
Yeah.
so that way the army can just walk in later.
Well, speaking of Air Force, the Ukrainian Air Force is basically non-existent at this point. Like, and it's not because necessarily they're all destroyed by the Russian military. It's because like the Ukrainian Air Force just has like no more fuels. Like Russia's basically destroyed everything, all their supplies. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean that's what the initial strikes were, was just
just a reminder. Like you had that one story about the ghost of Kiev, and then it's over. Okay, where's the rest of the Air Force? Where are the other battles, the air battles, right? Like, yeah.
yeah.
Also,
Where are all these?
well,
Oh, go ahead.
also, 1 week before the invasion actually happened, I read an article where like a huge amount of Ukrainian airmen were quitting. It's like they probably knew something that we didn't know ahead of time, but they quit like 1 week before the invasion actually happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like yeah, so like it just shows that like that the Ukrainian military, it just kind of proves our points that the Ukrainian military itself is not really interested in dying for Zelensky and his regime.
Mm-hmm.
And not just
Also
Zelensky.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out, like, Zelensky is not even ethnically Ukrainian, and if you're seeing like all this footage and destruction, it's mostly because of like the only strikes on civilian targets done by Russia were because there were Ukrainian military forces staging themselves like in hospitals and schools. Like there was a story of an elementary school being hit by a guided bomb, because there's the media of course won't say the reason. They'll say that they just hit a school, but then there was a Facebook post, or I believe it was a Facebook post, of some social media of a Ukrainian soldier, his entire company of troops in the school's gym.
Oh yeah, I saw the one. I remember. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the only civilian targets being hit are ones being actively used by the Ukrainian army or
Yeah.
the Ukrainian National
Well,
Guard.
there's a video from Kharkov or Kharkiv, if you still want to say it the Ukrainian way. There's a video where a bunch of people walk up to a soldier who's got a camera in his hands, of course, and they're telling him, "Hey, move the artillery equipment away from the buildings." He goes, "What are you talking about?" First he's asking them, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." They're telling him, "Look, we know there's artillery right next to the buildings. Get it away, right? Because they told the soldier, because of you, the Russians will be trying to get you, and they'll hit us, right? So get away from the building,
Mm-hmm.
get them away from the buildings." And for a while, the Ukrainian soldier, he's denying it at first, saying, "Oh, that's not true. That's not true. We're not doing this. We're not putting them next to buildings." And then after the civilians keep arguing with him, to tell him, "No, like we know you're doing this. Get them away, right?" You know what he does? He goes, "Are you trying to reveal our positions? Why are you doing this? Are you trying to reveal our positions?" It's like
Trying to
yeah, then he admits that, yeah, like we do have artillery right next to civilian buildings, right? Yeah.
trying to he's trying to convict this Ukrainian civilian of treason. Essentially, it's like
Yeah.
I think it was Zelensky. He made some executive order or something where any Ukrainian citizen that in any fashion cooperates with the Russians is now persona non grata. They're stripped of their citizenship and they will be tried and put in
Yeah.
life sentence prison.
Yeah. That's totally not a vague statement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like, oh, you disagree with me, huh? You're totally cooperating with Russians if you disagree with my opinion, huh?
now now you're
Yeah.
being liquidated over there with the
Yeah.
other traitors.
Yeah. It's like,
it's
yeah.
it's the paranoia of any regime that is falling. You always see this. Also, I'm drawing parallels to the mid-century Germans. Zelensky called up the Volkssturm, if you know what that was.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, uh,
Volkssturm.
Literally, we are going to conscript everybody, teenage boys to elderly men. We're going to give you rifles and make you human meat shields for the Russians. You have no training. You have no uniforms. Technically, without a uniform, you don't fall under the Geneva Convention. So he's doing that so that way Western media will see, look at these poor Ukrainians. They're all being slaughtered by the Russian army.
Yep.
It's such a tragedy. When you cause that, you arrange that,
Yep.
you non-Ukrainian ethnic Jew that has no relation with the Ukrainian people. So you're willing to let
Yeah.
these other people die. It's the classic Lenin
And on top
tactics over there.
and on top of that, like many Ukrainians don't want to die for Zelensky either. And what the media is not telling us is that there's a huge Ukrainian population that still supports Russia. That actually they're okay with the invasion. And for example, Kharkov, for example, or Kharkiv, they almost had a Donbass situation in 2014. They almost had it. It's just the mayor turned out to be a coward and he kind of not go through with it. But there were huge pro-Russian protests in 2014. The city of Kharkiv itself was full of like pro-Russian demonstrations and everything. And yeah, so then of course, then something similar happening in Odessa. You had something similar happening in Nikolaev. There's so many other Ukrainian cities where people have been waiting for Russian troops to finally arrive. And so Zelensky kind of like trying to create the Volkssturm, I don't know the proper pronunciation, Volkssturm.
It's the Volkssturm. It's you kind of have to
Volkssturm.
add an F to the V.
Volkssturm. So anyways, the point is that Zelensky doesn't even realize that he's also going to arm people who might turn against him. Right.
Mhm.
On top of that,
Didn't that happen too?
yes. So what happened is that in the city of Kiev, by the way, a lot of the boomers have been praising this, which is stupid on their end. They don't really know what really happened, right? Is that like Zelensky basically was giving out weapons, not him personally, but he gave orders to give out weapons in the city of Kiev, the capital. And they have these large crates full of rifles and ammo. And I don't know if they had grenades or not, but they had rifles and ammo for sure. All these crates, like imagine playing Call of Duty in live action. This live action Call of Duty, by the way, drop ship, some drops
a loot box drop.
Yeah, yeah, you're playing Call of Duty live right here. So on video, by the way, simultaneously, before I go further, Zelensky gave orders to release military prisoners and some other prisoners, right? So any random criminal elements could get a hold of those weapons, because here's what happened. When Zelensky gave the orders to release the prisoners and then to just have random shipments of weapons all over the city, right? Anybody with no registration, with no check, with nothing, no oversight, anybody just could come around and grab as much weapons as they can. And there were people just grabbing guns, grabbing ammunition, putting in their bags, whatever. And this one guy, citizen of Kiev, he's filming himself and he's saying, "Hey, everybody, if you want, here's a bunch of weapons. Just come and take it. It's all good. Just come and take it. There's enough weapons for everybody." And so, as a result, what happened is that within the capital, a pro-Russian militia was formed within the capital. Apparently, they're underground right now. They're not really doing anything at the moment, but they released a video saying, "Yeah, we got all these guns right now because like they made a video saying that they got all these guns because of Zelensky's orders to give away free guns and ammo in the capital. So they're saying, yeah, we decided to take advantage of this, and we created a pro-Russian militia, right? And then they sent a message
Hmm.
to the other pro-Russian sympathizers within the capital, saying, hey guys, take these guns, take advantage of this, because we will need this when the time comes, right? and and that time looks like
Yep.
it's coming soon, right? So Zelensky again shot himself in the foot. On top of that, the criminal elements that Zelensky released, well, they also got a hold of those weapons, and they would do a random stop, like they'll pretend to be military, right? And they'll stop a random car, they'll shoot the drivers, steal the car, and that's it. Boom. Like like it's madness. It's insane
Hmm.
madness what Zelensky's done. This is a patriotic Ukrainian president, whatever, right? And so um, and so it's funny how the baby boomers were being idiots over here in the States praising this, saying, oh, let's go to Ukraine, get some weapons, so hot, the right to bear arms. Now, don't get me wrong. Although I'm a monarchist, I support the right to bear arms. I believe that like citizens should have the right to defend themselves and everything. I support that. But when it comes to warfare, right, and you're trying to create a Volksstrom or something like that, or you're trying to create a militia, right? You, what you do is that you have a special building where you keep these weapons, where you store these weapons. You have soldiers guarding this military installation or this building, whatever it is, and then you have people line up. You write down their name, date of birth, all their info, you issue them a weapon with a serial number on it, and then you have them be taken some kind of group, your militia group number one, militia group number two, whatever, you're part of this regiment right here, right? You already send them to fight in some kind of military unit, and then you send them to the front lines. That's how you do it the proper way, right? But Zelensky, he just dropped a bunch of weapons all over the city, right? So there is no proper strategy for Ukraine to even win this war. Ukrainian soldiers who are still fighting, they're not fighting for their country, by the way. They're fighting for Zelensky. They're not fighting for
Hmm.
Ukraine. They're not. Because
Yeah.
Zelensky, he's fighting for for the globalist elites. He's a globalist elite puppet. So anyone, by the way, anyone who has the Ukrainian flag in their profile picture, you are a globalist. You are supporting globalism, by the way, because that's
Hmm.
what it is. It's a globalist Ukraine versus Orthodox Russia.
Russia's also self-confident about its national identity far more than Ukraine is. Like I've always seen this kind of in Ukraine. I was kind of young when Euromaidan happened, so I wasn't really paying attention
Mhm.
as much as I do today. But it's always seemed like insecurity on their hands. They're always trying to create this artificial identity for themselves at all times, and they're always trying to push away the more natural Russian identity, the one that they were a part of for literally up until the 1990s. And
Well,
I mean,
actually,
Ukraine.
I'll go further back. I'd say up until the 1920s, when the communists created the fake Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Yeah,
Mhm. Or the Germans in Brest-Litovsk when they split off Ukraine too. So you
yeah.
can also point to that. Or then like the Cossacks too. You can kind of point to their local identity. You can point to a lot of things on trying to formulate a Ukrainian identity, but still very artificial when in reality they were always part of, or at least most of Ukraine, of what we think about it, has been part of the Russian Empire for centuries. Or and then you're talking about the western part, which was part of Poland for also centuries until it was taken back by Russia. So like there's not been this Ukrainian identity, which makes them very insecure and coy about it, and they have to artificially emulate themselves to the rest of the world,
Well, yeah,
trying to
because
compensate for something they don't have.
yeah, yeah. The pro-Ukrainian side always claims that they're fighting for democracy, right? Their identity is democracy, right? And when I say pro-Ukrainian side, I mean the Ukrainians who still support Zelensky and his government, right? Their identity is democracy. Like they don't have a true identity. It's a political identity because they look at Western Europe and they look at their own country. They see that their own country is a dirty mess, right? And they look at Western Europe and they say, oh, it's so nice and beautiful, clean streets, people are nice to each other, and it's a good economy. But then they look at themselves, they see what kind of, you know, crap hole they live in, and they're told, well, you see, the reason why you're in this crap hole is because you're friends with Russia, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why, like you could say, this pro-Russian identity is being stripped away from them, and it's being replaced by this Ukrainian pro-democracy identity, right? Where if you're pro-Ukrainian, you're supporting democracy and like you're supporting Western European values. Which, again, what do you mean by Western European values? Are you talking about Western European values of today, of degeneracy? Is that what you're talking about? Like, yeah. And so, but this their true identity was stolen from them, you could say, by Lenin and Trotsky, going back to the communist era, because during the Tsarist era, people in that area called themselves Russians. There was no Ukrainian nationality, right? It was
Yep.
it was the equivalent of a Texan claiming to be a different nationality than an American. When no, everybody knows that a New Yorker is still an American. A Pennsylvanian is still an American. He's not a different nationality, right? And so back then it was kind of the same thing, right? You lived in Little Rus, you lived in Novorossiya, you lived in Galicia, like and then if the term Ukraine was used, it was not used as a nationality. It was not used as a national term. Like there's an old etymology for Ukraine. It just means, like, it comes from the word Ukraina, which um, basically means on the edge, borderlands, frontier lands. And it's the most western part of Russia at the time. So yeah, it was the Ukraina, it was the edge, it was the border, right, of Russia,
It's
right?
it's like and it's like Austria, where in the actual German it's Österreich, which Ost means east. It's the East Reich, the East
Mhm.
realm. It's the most eastern realm, the farthest away from German
Mhm.
civilization, which is kind of like the Ukraine, like you're saying, it's these outskirts,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's the
that's why I would
etymology.
told that's why I would totally right now, if Germany was to just invade Austria right now, I'd be 100% for it.
Hmm.
Well,
Or I
I mean,
mean,
yeah,
not the current gay Germany though.
yeah, but I mean, still, like if it comes to the unification of German people, I'd be like, hey, just invade them, right?
I'm
And yeah,
I'd also be like, can we have Königsberg back too?
well, well, Germany should invade Austria first, and then like Germany should then ask Russia if they can make compromise with Königsberg. Yeah, honestly, I think Königsberg probably would have been given up had NATO not expanded, to be honest.
Mhm.
Like, by the way, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the big anti-communist, even he was against the fall. He was against the way the Soviet Union broke apart. He goes, yeah, I hate communism, but I don't say, separate from each other. Right? like Solzhenitsyn, he actually said that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus were the only three who should have stayed in the Soviet Union, right? Because these three were the original
Mhm.
Russias. These were the Rus, these three, right? Belarus, Russia, and
Yep.
Ukraine. And
The Kievan Rus.
yeah, yeah, like the Kiev is. By the way, there's a historical element to this invasion. That's why, like, even before I became a monarchist, I was kind of many years ago. I even told myself I would totally be okay with Russia invading Ukraine, because they're the same people. It's basically Kiev and Russia, like basically it's the origins of Russian people is in Kiev, right? And so yeah, like even before I became a monarchist, I was okay with that idea. And by the way, why do you think 90% of Russian right wingers, 90% of Russian nationalists, 90% of Russian monarchists support the invasion of Ukraine? Because it's a restoration of Russian history. It's the return to Russian
Hmm.
origins. The roots of Russian history are in Kiev. On top of that, like it's also a religious reason because Kiev itself has so many sacred relics that are sacred to the Orthodox Church.
Wasn't the conversion of the Rus started in Kiev, right?
Yes, exactly. So you can still hear me right now, right? I thought we had an internet.
Yeah, yes, I can still hear you. You kind of broke up there a little bit, but I
Okay.
can still make
Okay.
out.
Yeah, Kiev is where it's the origins of Ukraine and Russia right there, Kiev, right? And so like that's another reason why Kiev is so important for so many Russian people, is because you're stealing their history from them. If you keep Kiev independence away from them and under control of Western degenerates, right? You're stealing their history from them, right? Because where do we come from? Where's the history? Oh, it's right there. It's owned by somebody else, right? You have no more history. It's
Hmm.
gone, right? Yeah. So this is another historical factor, and like, and this is what like the boomers don't get. They don't have this like idea of unification and like they have a distorted understanding what unity is. They have a distorted understanding what independence is, and so they
They
yeah.
think nation states can come out of the ether.
Yes, exactly. When it's like, no, there's a historical genetic root to Kiev for many Russian people. Yeah, so for a Russian guy living all the way in Vladivostok, Kiev is still very sacred to him, right? Because that's his
Yep.
roots, right? And yeah, and like so you can't just take that away. So prior to this invasion, prior to 2014, like like Russians were still kind of okay with Kiev being independent because we had friendly relations. You do not need any visa or passports to go back and forth, right? Well, you do not need a foreign passport to go back and forth, right? You just showed your regular state ID, and that's it. You cross the border, right? It's very close relations, and like, but then 2014 coup happens, and then we had this civil war in Ukraine for 8 years, and now we have this invasion because right now it's very important for the Russian national identity, right? And so,
Hmm.
some of the Ukrainians who live there, they've been brainwashed. They've been brainwashed by the communists that they're always a different group of people, that they were oppressed by the Tsars, and we'll create a Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And by the way, in this during the Soviet era, within the Soviet Union, out of all the 15 republics, right? Um, the Soviet Union had their own representatives in the United Nations, but guess what? Russia by
Ukraine
itself,
did as well.
yeah, but essentially Russia by itself did not have their own separate delegates in the UN. Russia did not, but Ukraine did, by the way. What's
Hmm.
interesting, if you study Soviet history, like like the only bad argument, I mean, the only anti-Soviet argument you have with Ukraine is the Holodomor that happened for 1932, 1933. But before and after, right? Ukraine was always coddled. Ukraine was always like treated like this, like baby, like it's so
The
precious, right?
special child.
Yeah, the special child, while Russia would always have to endure whatever troubles were there, right? And so yeah, and by the way, when Ukraine became independent, when it became independent, within the first 2 years, it had a good economy, strong military, but then they destroyed it all. They destroyed it all within less than 2 years. Less than 2 years, they destroyed everything, and life became worse in Ukraine than in Russia after the Soviet Union. And so
Hmm.
but you cannot take away Russian history from that place. That was always Russia. And but like so right but yeah, so any Ukrainian in Ukraine who says, "Well, I'm Ukrainian, man. Like, I just love my country." Cool. Okay, you live in a fake artificial country. I'm sorry. Your national roots are with the Russians. You share the same roots. You cannot separate from that. And on top of that, like I always like to bring talk about a Ukrainian historian who also made the connection. So Western Ukraine, for those of you who don't know, Western Ukraine is the heart and soul of Ukrainian nationalism, right? Like, and so like the biggest hardcore Ukrainian nationalists, they come from Western Ukraine, not from Central, not from Eastern, but from Western Ukraine. And so there's this author, I forgot his first name, but his last name is Sparsha, I believe, Sparsha. And so he grew up in Western Ukraine, and he grew up with this brainwashed idea that like that he's Ukrainian, and that the Ukrainian nation is different than the Russian nation and so forth. And he was kind of brainwashed by this Ukrainian nationalist ideology. But then he starts to do research on the origins of the Ukrainian people. He could not find anything about the Ukrainian people. He could not find any historical evidence that Ukrainian people existed, right?
Hmm.
And think
He,
about
he
this.
found out quickly it was astroturfed.
He found out quickly that, oh, wait a minute, we're always Russian. like he started to go through documents and he goes, wait a minute, we're always Russian. Oh no. So he wrote his book. So he wrote his book based on historical citations, historical evidence. And he wrote his book. It's called The Ukraine That Never Existed. And so so he obviously had to leave Ukraine because like his book, I believe, came out like probably like not too long before the Maidan situation, right? And so yeah, so he had to leave Ukraine for safety reasons, right? Because by the way, the democratic government in Ukraine uh, did not allow free speech. By the way, when the democratic coup happens, when they overthrew the so-called bad president, replaced him with the good one, apparently, they became more dictatorial, and so anything against Ukraine would have got you in prison or probably would have got you killed. And yeah,
It it's free speech with the asterisks there.
yeah. So yeah, so he had to leave, but he wrote his book um, called "The Ukraine That Never Existed." And
Hmm.
but think about this: you grow up your entire life as this Ukrainian nationalist. You believe in this Ukrainian identity. You do your own research, and you can't find this identity. You can't find this group, but you do find out that you're always a Russian. That your ancestry is always Russian, right? Yeah,
Yep. There's nothing distinguishing you from these people waving the red, white, and blue flag, and you have this blue and yellow that just looks ugly. In all honesty, it looks like the most artificial and astroturf flag in existence. That's just my opinion on the Ukrainian flag.
yeah. But here's the thing: when you talk to your average Ukrainian nationalist, by the way, they're not sophisticated. They're not well educated. They're not. They don't really know history. Like and the reason why I know this
Hmm.
is because I am from that culture. Like my parents are from Ukraine, right? And so
Hmm.
I kind of grew up with this like somewhat Ukraine pro Ukraine, not pro Ukrainian in the sense that what it is today, but I kind of was like, yeah, Ukrainians, Russians, we're just a brotherly nation, but we're still different, right? And we have similar language, but like that's how I grew up with that mentality that we're different, right? But then like the more history I studied, like I also came to the same conclusions. But where are these Ukrainians? Like they don't exist. Because the people in the Donbass, they did not lose that Russian identity, despite the fact that the communists tried to force that identity out of them. The communists are the ones who created the Ukrainian identity, right? So basically, the people in the Donbass, they never forgot their identity. They always knew that they were Russian. That's why they had that's one of the reasons why they had the rebellion. That's one of the reasons why the people in Crimea never forgot their Russian identity, right? Like
Hmm.
watch the videos where the Crimean people like just like like had Russian flags everywhere, pro-Russia, like they're so glad to be part of Russia because they never forgot their Russian identity, right? But
Yep.
but the areas that were central Ukraine and like Western Ukraine, yeah, like they're long gone. Like if we go further, like some could argue that it was not even a communist invention. Like you could say that the Poles, they started it, they threw some seeds of this division, then the communists simply just uh, perfected this mission of separating the Russian people and creating the Ukrainians, right?
Hmm.
So so Ukraine is fighting for what? Uh, well, not Ukraine itself. Like let's also make it
The
distinguish. Let's distinguish this. This is not a war between Putin and the Ukrainian people. This is a war between Russia
the
and
Kiev regime.
or you could say Russia and Zelensky, right? Like this is not a war against the
Mhm.
Ukrainian people, and I've always known that. Like I'm thinking, like, and you probably know this too because like Russia simply was only mostly targeting military sites, right? Like they're not really interested in destroying the Ukrainian army completely. They're not interested in like destroying any of these historical cities, which were Russian cities, by the way, right? Kharkov, that was a Russian city all the time historically, right? Donetsk, Lugansk, those are also historical Russian cities, right? But like, but let's go further. This is not just a war between Russia and Zelensky as well. This is a war between Russia and globalism because the
Hmm.
current Zelensky regime, and before him too, Poroshenko was also a product of the Maidan coup. Zelensky, people thought Zelensky would just replace this product of Maidan coup, but no, it got worse with Zelensky, right? But Zelensky just continuing the work of the Maidan just on full speed this time. Poroshenko did it like at 50 miles per hour. Zelensky's going all 120 on the gas. He's like going hard on the gas
Hmm.
pedal right there, and so like that's why it basically had to be conquered because enough was enough for multiple reasons, right? So like he wanted to join NATO, which again like Russia's been saying for many years before Maidan, it's been known that it's not good to force Ukraine into NATO or to accept Ukraine into NATO. That was already known, but Zelensky he still was flirting with NATO, right? Then he just escalated the war in Donbass, made it a lot worse, right? He did nothing to end the unofficial persecution of the UOC Church. He basically he's the one. It was under him where it was no longer legal to speak Russian inside a public building or inside of any grocery store, inside of any uh, like anything. Like if you're inside a bank, you cannot speak Russian. It's got to be Ukrainian, right? And so forth. And so like things only got worse under Zelensky because it was also under Zelensky when they had I believe it was under Zelensky when they had the gay pride parade, right? So like right there,
Hmm.
uh, like I could be wrong in that part. It probably was under Poroshenko, I'm not sure, but still, like all this is happening right now, right? Under the Ukrainian regime, all this is happening under the Ukrainian regime, and they're all puppets, and they want to join the EU, they want to join the European Union, right? They're globalist puppets. And also all their oligarchs, they're funded by George Soros, they're funded by the Rothschilds, right? The IMF, the
By Klaus
international,
Schwab,
yeah,
by
well, the IMF, like every time the IMF gave Ukraine money, like billions of dollars to fix their economy, to make life better for the average Ukrainian, where'd that money go? That money went straight into the pockets of the
Zelensky's
well,
supporters.
even before Zelensky, it went to the pockets of Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk
Hmm.
and all these other politicians, right? And then Zelensky just continued the game. He continued playing the same way, went all into his pockets, right? And so that is why the globalists support him. That's why the globalists fund him. And that is why the globalists want him to join NATO. That's why the globalists want him to join the EU, right? Uh, because like Russia is basically like so far the only one not the only one, but one of the few resisting this uh, globalist dominance. I'm not saying Russia's a perfect country. No, it's not.
I,
But when it comes to, but if you just compare who's actually still not completely dominated by globalism, well, it's Russia and Belarus, right? While you have
mhm.
Ukraine, like Poland's already globo central, like it's not as base as some people think it is. It's already global central and supporting Ukraine, by the way, right? But and so Ukraine, so anyone who's supporting the Ukrainian government, anyone who has the Ukrainian flag, anyone who supports Zelensky is basically a globalist. You're supporting globalism. So screw every baby boomer who basically voted for Trump because Trump spoke out against globalism. He said globalism is bad, right? And so screw every baby boomer who spoke out against globalism, but is now supporting the Ukrainian government, which is a pro-globalist regime. So screw those baby boomers because that's what they're doing. Every
Mhm.
baby boomer who is supporting Ukraine is literally supporting globalism.
I mean, yeah, if you look at Zelensky, for instance, I've heard this. I'm not sure if it's true, but doesn't he speak like imperfect Ukrainian? Like he
Oh no,
speaks the
no, no, no. That part, no. He speaks both languages perfectly. Yeah,
okay. I
yeah.
I thought I heard somewhere that he spoke it improperly, kind of like, all kind of like the trope of all Jews, like say German Jews would speak like a very accented
Mhm.
a German that was very distinct and alien. And I guess that was just a rumor I heard. Um uh, but Zelensky is like you look to just his basic identity. It's like, okay, so he's a part of an ethnic minority, an ethnic religious minority of the tribe. And then also, he spent a lot of time outside of Ukraine. He was an actor. He was in these circles, these globalist circles, which all celebrities are, because that's the only way you make
Mhm.
it anywhere.
Oh, by the way,
Um,
he also filmed and produced movies in Russia. By the way, during the 8 year Civil War conflict, within that time frame, he had enough time to shoot some movies in Russia before he ran for president. Shows you how much loyalty he
mhm.
has for Ukraine, by the way.
Yeah, and as soon as the globalists offer him a position in as why don't you run for Ukrainian president? You're this political outsider, according to most people. It's going to be like a Trump situation. We're going to get this political outsider to become our a little puppet, and we'll send you money. We'll send your friends money. We'll get you this loyal base of support, and you'll create this new regime that will directly work for the IMF and the World Economic Forum, and for Klaus Schwab's camp, George Soros's camp, and you'll answer to these puppets to get Ukraine into global homo, to spread our corrupting ideology manufactured by the baby boomers. And I mean, it existed before that, but it really exploded in their generation and really embraced. So you can just see all these tentacles converging on Zelensky, and Zelensky is just a siphon for their power over Ukraine.
And Ukraine was full of NGOs, full of NGOs. Like it was NGO
Mhm.
central. That's another reason why some normal Ukrainians even ended up fighting against the Donbass folks, is because they're brainwashed to believing that, oh, those are just evil Russians down there and they're trying to destroy your way of life. You know, you had normal Ukrainians brainwashed within 30 years. They were brainwashed by these NGOs. Yeah, like it wasn't even the government brainwashing them. It was these NGOs spreading their propaganda through media, um, through all these other public forms of communications and so forth. And of course, influencing government officials, buying them out, making deals with them, making them rich, right? So yeah, so these foreign NGOs played a major role in Ukraine. They were playing a major role in Russia for a long time. That is why Russia still is infected by some globalism as well. There's some of that infection where Russia's trying to get rid of that. while the Ukrainian government embraced it completely and decided to just
Mhm.
uh, and decided to morally destroy their own people, basically for profit.
Yep. Um, uh, I was kind of thinking of like the globalism lingering in Russia. All these companies that are like canceling Russia now, like Netflix,
Yeah,
Amazon, Apple, etc. I'm just saying it's like you're not, and Pornhub especially. I'm like, I'm glad Pornhub canceled services in Russia. It's like, all your companies, you're not you're not really punishing Russia. You're just getting rid of your degeneracy from them.
yeah,
Russia, in a few years, once they wean themselves off of you, will be so much more free of globalist influence now that you're gone than when you were there.
yeah. And on top of that, with his invasion, like his ratings went up, right? Now the question is,
Hmm.
why did Putin's ratings go up? Because a lot of the people who are in opposition to Putin supported Russian-Ukraine unification. That's why. Like, because in 2010 and 2012, Putin stabbed a lot of nationalists in the back. He stabbed, you could say, like monarchists in the back too, right? And then
Hmm.
so like for a long time prior to this invasion, like even a year ago, many Russian nationalist bloggers would talk crap about Putin. They'll talk about how he's none but a backstabber. He should not be trusted, right? But they all believed historically, from a historical perspective, that Russia and Ukraine are one people, that they're the same nation, right? And so now Putin surprised everybody. He surprised the right wing. He surprised the right wing nationalists with his invasion, because they're thinking, hey, that's what we want. We've always supported this, right? We've always supported this invasion, and we're surprised Putin's doing it. And so that's why you can say that that his ratings went up. um, it's not necessarily because of some liberal opposition guys switch sides. No, it's because the right wing opposition that he had, which he had a right wing opposition that did not like him. But with this invasion, all of a sudden he earned some brownie points. He earned the brownie points from the monarchists, from the Orthodox, from the nationalists, because he's done something that they've always thought he should have done a long time ago.
I thought I saw like about a year ago or something, there was a monarchist like pretty intense protest. I believe it was in a Siberian city, if I'm remembering right. And I was like kind of surprised because I thought like, oh, aren't these like, just seeing as an outsider, aren't these monarchists and nationalists behind Putin because he's bringing back Orthodox Church to center stage and stuff? And I was like, I didn't know that there was a right wing opposition until I saw an article about monarchist opposition in Russia to Putin.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah, like that's a very real thing, like there's lots of right wing groups, right wing opposition to Putin, but uh, but if these right wing oppositions, if they came to power, they would have done what Putin would have done, and a lot quicker,
yeah.
right? But yeah, so Putin right now, like from his geopolitical standpoint, he realized no matter what we do, no matter what I do, we're always going to be sanctions, no matter what we do, no matter where we go. We're going to be treated with suspicion. We're going to be, no matter what we do, right? And so Putin's like, you know what, screw it. Like, recognize the republics, the Donetsk, Lugansk republics, and invade Ukraine, right? Just screw it all, right? Like, and so in the eyes of the right wing opposition to Putin, okay, bravo, finally, it's about time. Because Russian monarchists and Russian nationalists, they know the history. They know the history, where they come from. They know that this is their origins. That Ukraine and Russia should always be together. If Alexander Solzhenitsyn, if he was alive right now, I guarantee he would have supported this invasion. He would have.
Yep.
Obviously, he would have been saddened if Russians and Ukrainians were killing each other. Yeah, but in the long run, he would have supported a unification of the Rus together, finally. Alexander Solzhenitsyn,
Hmm.
again, despite being anti-communist, was still against the way the USSR fell apart. He wanted Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus to stay together in the USSR, be the only ones left, right? Like,
Yep.
yeah, like, but he's totally against the separation of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. He totally opposed that. So if he was alive today, he also would have supported the invasion.
I don't know. I got a lot of shit when I was younger because when I was a kid, of course, I kind of liked Putin just because I was like, this seems more he seems a bit more natural. He seems a bit more down to
Yeah,
earth. And now that I'm actually older, I'm actually understanding why I supported him as a kid. I'm like, oh, okay, he is the one standing up against globalism. He is the shining example that you do not need to bow to NGOs, to degeneracy to be a successful country, world leader, and active opposition to it is actually far healthier for it in the long term. Like most people, like they always point to like Russia, oh, look at their tiny GDP, look at their
yeah.
declining population. It's like, well, okay, the declining population in reality, you can blame World War II for that.
Actually, by the way, not to interrupt, but the population actually grew recently. It went from 142 to 145.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.